I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. If you thought the midterm election season was over, think again. Florida is in a recount in a critical Senate race. The Democrats keep picking up more House seats that were too close to call last week. So was there a blue wave after all? It may not seem possible, but President Trump has ramped up his war on the press another few notches since the midterms, banning a CNN correspondent for the White House and attacking 3 female African-American White House reporters. Will it get even worse? What's the fallout from this? Later on, I'll have additional thoughts in CODA. But we begin with Amazon, the online giant that has disrupted the entire retail business. Dozens of cities competed to be the site of the 50,000-job, multi-billion-dollar HQ2, as it was called. In the end, Amazon split the huge project in two, with Long Island City and Queens, Arlington, Virginia, the winners. One of the biggest economic development projects in years, Amazon got about $1.7 billion in incentives from New York alone. Certainly a good deal for Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. He got the okay for his own helipad. But was it a good deal for New York? Corey Kilgannon of the Times, a Metro reporter, is here to tell us. And Corey, your lead on that story was magnificent in itself. You said until recently the most important thing to know about Amazon for residents of the Queensbridge houses, the country's largest public housing project, was that if any packages left in the lobby from Amazon, they would likely be stolen. Well, what's in store for Queensbridge houses now? Do they benefit from Amazon or not?
I mean, that's the question. That's what we went to Queensbridge last week to find out what kind of package Amazon would deliver for them as far as jobs. Would they get hired? What would happen to the neighborhood by Amazon coming in? And, you know, basically there's a degree of skepticism as to whether Amazon is going to help them. The thing about not getting packages delivered, that was a few people told us that, including one guy who's a rapper, Piff Jones, who said, I can't even get Amazon packages delivered to my building because I can't get them left in the lobby because they might get stolen. And he pointed me over to across the street there. There's a big, center where you have to get them left in a locker. But I think the worry is that Amazon is going to hire the best and the brightest. I mean, we're already hearing that they're going to, in the end, bring about 25,000 jobs, and some of the people, making up 150 grand a year. Now, these are going to be high-tech people. I mean, recruited probably nationally, if not globally. Are they going to be recruiting from Queensbridge and other low-income areas? We don't know yet, but Amazon, after the announcement on Tuesday, did say they were going to put some, job fair type of programs at places like Queensbridge.
So they may train people, and also they've got to employ people who have to eat, who have to have their cars parked, who have to do all sorts of other, at least ancillary things. One of the things that the people in the neighborhood are concerned about is gentrification, but that certainly shouldn't affect public housing, right?
Well, it won't affect public housing itself. It'll happen all around it. Now, you got to realize that Long Island City, it's already gentrifying or gentrified, south of the Queensboro Bridge mostly. I mean, there's 40 new, luxury skyscrapers have gone, buildings, high-rises, I should say, that have gone up there in the past number of years. An infusion of people and new businesses. It's
really remarkable when you go up the FDR Drive or something, look at the Queens waterfront.
Right, yeah, it's astonishing. But more north of the Queensboro Bridge, you have mixed use, you have industrial, and in fact, I went to the site where that Amazon actually is going to build. It's millions of square foot of office space. It's right on the river. It's an amazing spot actually, right across from Midtown Manhattan. Amazing views. And it's one of these areas right on the edge of where all the nice new businesses have come around these new buildings. So you're talking about 25,000 employees. I mean, it's going to change the neighborhood, enormously. And already you have a gold rush real estate-wise of people buying apartments at, jacked up prices already after the announcement.
So you could argue that Amazon really held up the city, hijacked the city for and the state for tax subsidies and things like that. But what are they giving in return? Elected officials say it's going to be a strain on services, obviously education, certainly transportation, other things. are the people in the neighborhood going to be in any way compensated for that?
I mean, Amazon did talk about certain amenities that they are going to give back to the neighborhood. But is it going to make up for, like you said, the strain on an already, like the 7 train? I mean, people there already talk about having to let 1 or 2, 3 trains go by because they're already too crowded. Platforms, and you can imagine all these people coming to work in the area aren't. It's going to tax a system that's already overtaxed. But then again, a lot of people believe that Amazon, the huge project, is going to help the infrastructure. They're going to put in new sewer mains or whatever one puts in these areas. So it may improve certain that immediate area.
And Gina Belafonte, in her Big City column in the Times, pointed out that a lot of us are really urban hypocrites, that we complain about Amazon, we complain about the fact it's putting a lot of small retailers out of business, but meanwhile we're sitting there pressing the buy button and using Amazon.
Right. I mean, if you're an Amazon customer, then this is one of the reasons they're expanding and they need more headquarters. Yeah, I mean,
do we know how Amazon has done in other cities, particularly in Seattle, where they are based originally? Have they been civic-minded?
They did point out that they donate millions of dollars to help the homeless programs and needy programs, employment programs, and that kind of thing. And point to that as an indication of what they're going to do for Long Island City. Oh, the point I was trying to reach for before was that a lot of people will tell you that this e-commerce giant that Amazon is one of these factors that are also making the brick and mortar storefronts less relevant, less busy. They don't do as much business. So there are a lot of storefronts that are vacant now in New York City. And people blame Amazon and other e-commerce, online purchase companies for that. So that's another part of people talk about where do you stand? Are you still using Amazon? Do you still have an Alexa on your counter, or you're still crying that they're going to ruin the neighborhood? It is a certain. Ginny had a good column about that.
Yeah, she did indeed, and something to consider when we complain and then look the other way and do it ourselves. Corey Kilgannon of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. And up next, the president versus the press. Mr. Trump's attacks on journalists have gotten nastier, more personal. Is there anything the press can or should do about it?
On the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists. Now people are also
I don't
saying
know why you'd
that
say
the
that.
president.
That's such a racist
There are
question.
some people.
Sit down, please. Sit down. I didn't call you. I didn't call you. I didn't call you. I'll give you voter suppression. Excuse me, I'm not responding to you. I'm talking to this gentleman. Will you please sit down?
Do you want him to rein in Robert Mueller?
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
That was President Trump tearing into 3 female African-American White House correspondents. Some observers think he demeaned them. Meanwhile, CNN sued the White House to regain access for reporter Jim Acosta, who had his credentials yanked after a heated exchange with Mr. Trump at a news conference. How much uglier is this going to get, and what should the press do about it? Let's ask Michael Grinbaum, media correspondent from the New York Times. Michael, let's talk first about the black women whom the president had those exchanges with. Was the president going too far? I mean, the women who asked him those questions didn't seem to be disrespectful at all.
Well, we have a president who, over the course of his career in private and public life, has maligned journalists of all races, genders, stripes. But we have seen a pattern of him taking a particularly harsh response to journalists of color, and particularly women. April Ryan, who was one of the reporters that he told to sit down several times in that segment we just saw, he was the reporter who, if you remember very early on, asked a question about the Congressional Black Caucus. The president said, April, why don't you set up a meeting for me with them, as if suggesting that because she was black, she was close with those politicians. So there's been a certain blind spot that he seems to have in those situations.
All right, let's keep in mind, I was looking back at the clips, that FDR once awarded a reporter a dunce cap. He once awarded, from the New York Times, in fact, once awarded a reporter from the Daily News the German Iron Cross. And of course, Harry Truman once told a reviewer, I think for the Washington Post, who reviewed his daughter singing, "Someday I hope to meet you. When that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter below." So what's different about Donald Trump?
Well, this has never been an easy beat to cover, and presidents have been infuriated by their press coverage for decades now, as you demonstrate. What seems different here is perhaps the more public nature and the systematic nature of this president's maligning of the press, the enemy of the people, using a phrase more associated with totalitarian governments. Fake news, I report around the country on politics, and often when I introduce myself as being from the New York Times, I immediately hear back, "You're fake news." It's a phrase that's entered our national lexicon thanks to the president who repeats it so often. So whereas previous presidents had those individual tiffs with reporters, Donald Trump has made it a major component of his administration.
How does that affect your reporting? How does that affect you as a reporter for the New York Times dealing with people when you can make an argument that the president, you can say whether he's right or wrong, has sort of poisoned people's viewpoints?
Well, politicians have always campaigned against the press. I find in those moments, if I'm accused of fake news, I say, well, I'm interviewing you, I want to know what you think. I want to include your thoughts in our coverage. And sometimes they'll shake their heads and they're skeptical and they'll walk away. But other times, I've found that even responding to angry emails from readers, they tend to respond in a much more civilized manner when they realize there's a human on the other end. I think that people tend to see these news organizations as monoliths, as the journalists as cogs in a broader machine, and in a way that personal touch can make a difference.
We obviously may well be overtaken by events in this conversation, but the Jim Acosta having his press credentials withdrawn, even Fox News has said the president has gone too far. So how are reporters supposed to react to something like that? How far are we supposed to go in challenging a presidential or a White House decision like that?
Well, you've seen a pretty aggressive response from the major news organizations, including Fox, standing side by side with a rival network, taking away Jim Acosta's press credential. In some ways, it seems like a publicity stunt. It plays into the White House's hands because there are many members of the president's base who I think were thrilled by the fact that Jim Acosta was finally being, quote unquote, punished for his critical questions. But news organizations and press advocacy groups are very concerned that there's a precedent here, that a president can pick and choose which journalists come to the White House and cover his events. And that seems to be bleeding into dangerous territory.
Acosta has a reputation of hardly being a shy, subtle reporter. Does that make any difference in this whole equation?
Well, there's been a lot of comparisons to Sam Donaldson, who was very aggressive with Ronald Reagan when he covered the White House in the 1980s. Jim Acosta does have the reputation of a showboat among some of his press corps colleagues, and he often doesn't necessarily make news from the questions that he asks. It tends to create moments, confrontations with the president that certainly get a lot of viewership. I think that there's a broader principle at play here, which is why even the New York Times has joined in saying it will file an amicus brief to support CNN's effort, which is that if this happens to one correspondent, how do we know it won't happen to the rest? And nobody wants to be in a position where they're not defending their journalists.
And Michael, how do you draw a distinction between respect for the office and respect for the person occupying the office?
Well, the problem here is that it's the president who's defining what respect is. That's not really his prerogative. These are reporters who are questioning our elected leaders, as they've done for decades and centuries in this country. There's an argument about protocol. in a formal White House news conference, and how journalists should comport themselves. But to take that to the level of yanking a press pass, as opposed to solving that problem privately in a back channel with a network executive, is a whole new front.
Thanks to Michael Grinbaum, media correspondent for the New York Times. And straight ahead, the midterm election season that just won't end. No hanging chads this time, but there's a controversial recount in a hotly contested Senate race in Florida. Republicans claim fraud, no evidence at all to back up that charge. Meanwhile, Democrats have been picking up more House seats as tight contests are finally decided. So was the wave bluer than most pundits thought at first? Let's take the political pulse with Eleanor Randolph and Clyde Haberman, both contributing writers at the New York Times. It looks like those races are being decided one by one in favor of the Democrats. Is that why the president seems to be getting more and more testy?
Who knows? Nobody knows the real reason the real reason why he acts so bizarre all the time. I mean, and he looks tired to me. I mean, this not going out in the rain to go to an American cemetery in France. I mean, excuse me, that's low energy. Remember, low energy Bush.
Mm-hmm.
So,
he didn't even have, if I just interrupt, he didn't even go to a cemetery here on Veterans Day here on Monday when it was celebrated. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, is if there's such a thing as a slow blue wave, that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, on election night, we all thought, we talked about a blue trickle and a blue, a tiny
lapping at the shore.
Mm-hmm. But now this really is a blue wave. I mean, they needed 26 seats. They've gotten at least 10 more than that, and maybe close to 40. And so that's a wave.
I was struck too by the fact that Fox News joined in the correspondents' reaction to the president yanking the press credentials of Jim Acosta. And this week also the Federalist Society expressed concern about the president violating the rule of law in some of his decisions, constitutionally and otherwise.
Well, we've supported Fox News in a number of cases. I mean, there was a case about a reporter who was reporting what the government thought was intelligence, and we supported Fox News. The New York Times,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, the New York Times editorial board. We supported them, trying to protect him from having to go to jail.
And while not as egregious as yanking Acosta's credentials, the Obama White House wasn't great toward Fox, considered it the enemy, which it was.
Wasn't great toward us either.
And or toward us, so that there are legitimate issues that all press operations should, news media operations should join in.
Speaking of contrarian actions, I was struck by the Amazon agreement between Mayor de Blasio and
a Freudian slip.
it was a Freudian slip because Mayor Bloomberg actually played a role in it, and Governor Cuomo. It seemed to me that if this had taken place some time ago, Councilman de Blasio would have been the first one out there objecting to it.
You're probably right. I mean, the thing is, if you look at Amazon, Clyde and I have already agreed that we disagree very slightly about this. I mean, I think it's basically a good thing that Amazon is going to Queens. I think they need
Good for the city.
Good for the city. I mean, you're talking about 25,000 jobs, and not all of those jobs are going to be vice presidents for Amazon. They're going to be a lot of jobs that people are going to make maybe $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 a
There'll be
year.
people packing up books,
Packing, parking,
making meals, parking.
Delivering, all sorts of things like that. It's just that Bezos has to recognize that he has to be a good citizen here, and he has to train people. He said he would do that. He's got to pay. I think he should pay more for the infrastructure, because I think the city and the state need to maybe what he could do is pay the MTA, give a great donation to the MTA to help ease the transit from Queens.
The MTA was just saying it's going to clearly raise the fare by March. My uneasiness deals with the process. It was done so secretly that normal land use procedures were totally thrown out the window. Now, granted, New York's procedures along this line can be very onerous, and I can understand why the governor and the mayor may want to do it, but that's no excuse. That means, if I said on Twitter, I said, why don't I, if I'm ever driving in the city, why don't I just run through red lights because I'm late for an appointment? There's a speed issue. It just doesn't hold water. And now what? Now, understandably, the folks representing that district, Van Bramer in the council, Mike Gianaris up in Albany, are outraged, and I think they have every right to be. And what happens to the next company that says, well, you gave, depending on how you calculate, $2 billion or whatever to Amazon, I want mine. Mike Royko's old line, the Chicago's slogan should be, Ubi es mea, where's mine?
Exactly.
We went through this in this city, including a company like the New York Times, which wasn't going to leave the city, but got tax breaks for its relatively new building now. At time after time. And I thought at some point this form of corporate welfare, especially for the richest man on the planet, and for all I know, the galaxy, was going to be curbed.
Very quickly, we complain about the Board of Elections here in New York City. How do you explain Florida?
You don't.
Oh, no, you don't.
You really don't. One of the things that people in Florida say is anytime you have a really close election, you have this kind of problem. But they seem to have this problem every
Why?
2 years.
Maybe it's competence on the local election stuff, but it takes time to count. Immediately the Republicans went to, it's a fraud. No, it's not. You got to count. They didn't allow the count in Bush v. Gore. The Supreme Court finally shut that down with a separation of 537 votes in Florida. We're not asking now for a count. I don't mean me part of it. The Americans shouldn't be asking for it. Now it's a recount. So first they don't want to count. Now they don't want to recount. At what point does democracy, lower D, kick in?
Thanks to Eleanor Randolph, Clyde Haberman, and I'll add some thoughts on CODA next. When Jeff Bezos began his online bookstore a mere quarter-century ago, it was originally called Cadabra, as in the magical incantation abracadabra. But Bezos was persuaded that instead of implying marketing wizardry, the name might evoke a cadaver and mortal remains. So in 1994, Cadabra became Amazon, a natural analog between the world's longest river and its biggest bookstore. The river itself was named for a race of female warriors. They were supposedly so fierce and competitive that they cut or burned off one breast so they could draw their bowstrings more easily. Which brings us to Amazon's decision this week to locate its new headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. One look at the vague 32-page memo of understanding would leave New Yorkers worried about the details. Still, 50 years after corporations were fleeing the city for corporate parks in the suburbs and the Southwest, Amazon's move amounts to an enormous vote of confidence in New York's future. Give credit where it's due. The groundwork was laid by Mayor Bloomberg when he lured the Cornell Tech campus to Roosevelt Island. And let's hope any sacrifices facing Amazon's new neighbors in Queens, or the subsidies siphoned from city and state tax revenue, will be less brutal than those that the Amazon women inflicted on themselves. The Amazon agreement conjured up the company's original name, too. That Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo found common ground was indeed magical. Maybe it's because they both feel like lame ducks and are liberated from seeking re-election. Maybe it's because they realize they can't expect any help from Washington and will have to help themselves. Maybe it's because with the Democrats in control of City Hall and Albany, there are no local Republicans to blame anymore. Imagine if the magic could also work for congestion pricing to fix the subway, charter schools, red light cameras, City University, rent regulation, and all the rest of the urban agenda. The Hudson is not as long as the Amazon, but it was meant to connect New York City and Albany, not to divide them. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.